lovely mink coat transformed into a throw and a cowl. So here's the finished project. It is lovely. The front as well as the back of the coat. The customer chose to keep her monogram and to use the inside of her lining. And as always, now I have to be extremely careful how I remove this lining because I'm going to be using it in the final product. We are removing the sleeve area, being careful not to damage any of the fur while taking off the lining. We move to the opposite side. And this could be a little tedious because it's sewn in by hand and the thread that they use is pretty thick. Once the lining is completely removed, I then start working on the largest part of the fur, and that's usually the back. I try to make it as long or as wide as possible to maximize the amount of fur, straight fur, that I can get out of one cut. And while cutting along the edge, you got to be really careful only to cut into the leather part of the fur and not into the actual fur or the hairs, because if you cut the hairs too short, you'll definitely be able to see that in the final product. And whenever I start a new project, I always start with a new, clean, sharp blade, because these blades, they wear out pretty quickly. Now I'm going on to the longer pieces. Not quite as wide, but I want to, again, maximize the amount of straight pieces that I can get out of one cut. I wouldn't be able to use this panel the way it is because it flares out to the side. And here I am again, changing another blade. Now this is the piece with the pocket area, and if I'm lucky, I can incorporate the edge of the strip with the edge of the pocket area, but that's not always the case. So if I can't, then I just have to sew up that pocket area. But in this case, I'm going to have to sew up the pocket area because I wanted, again, the straightest straight piece possible, which included that pocket area. And these strip pieces on the sides will be used later on in the project, either in the throw itself or in the cowl that the customer asked me to make for her. And I'm just picking out little strings. There are strings all over this coat. It was very well made. Lots of tacking stitches. And the area that I was just marking out where the holes were for the buttons. So I'm going to make sure that once this is cut out, I'm going to repair those holes so they will not be visible in the final product. Once that's all done, I put it on the table and I lay them out in strips, starting with the center, and then I work my way out. I look to see which parts of the fur look best together, and then I try to piece in the pieces that I'm missing. Once I have that, I'm going to sew on my fur machine the longer strips together, and I smooth out the areas that I joined together. And once that's done, I comb the fur out, place it back on the table, pin it in place, and make sure that it's nice and straight. I'm also going to mark where the edge is, and I'm going to cut that off so that all my strips are going to be exactly the same length. Here I'm trying to figure out what's the best configuration for the center part, and I'm going to take 3 different pieces of fur, combine them together, cut them, and then sew them together to make one long strip. Now that that strip is completed, I'm going to comb it out. I'm going to flip it with its right side on the bottom. I'm going to pin it in place, smooth it all the way out along the table, tacking it down as I move along. And I'm going to take that long piece of wood that I have, and I'm going to mark the edge of the fur, and then I'm going to cut those down to make sure that the whole fur is even. Now I'm going to start making these little hash marks or registration marks. I want to be able to make sure that when I sew the strips together, that one side is not going to be longer than the other. So I make these little registration marks throughout the quilt, evenly across the whole back of the fur. If I didn't do that, if I just sewed it as a single strip without using those registration marks, what would happen is one side would probably be much longer due to stretching. So we don't want that. So when I match up those marks on the fur machine, I will sew those little tack marks first and then do the whole seam. I'm going to remove the pins, and I'm also going to mark which panel I'm going to be working with. So I'm going to have panel 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This way I don't mix them up when I go to sew them together. When I go to the fur machine, I'm going to match up those registration marks that I just made. I'm going to sew a few stitches and then move on to the next mark. not sewing the whole seam at one time, just the registration marks. This is going to ensure that it will lay flat and the quilt will be even when it is completed. Like I said, it does stretch if you don't do this, especially with a long piece. Once they've all been tacked together, then I sew the whole seam, being very careful to tuck in the hairs. This fur machine is a bonus fur machine. A lot of people ask me about it. It's over 100 years old. It's called a Bonus A, and it's primarily used for very thin skinned furs like like mink and seal. You can sew fox and beaver on it, but it's really not meant for that. But you can do it. Once that seam is done, I go back and I check to make sure that all of the fur is tucked in and or that I have all the seams together and even. Once that's done, then I'm going to roll it out, and then here it is completed. I put on the cotton backing and the ribbon that goes around the edge. I sew the backing onto it, which is the original backing, with the original monogram, which she asked to be in the corner. It measured 45 inches wide and 52 inches long. With the scraps, I made a cowl, but this is what the throw looks like, and it drapes really pretty. It's such a lovely fur. So here is the cowl. It was already put together. She asked for one that had a keyhole because she wants to slip the fur into the middle. So I marked it, cut a hole in the center, and this is what it looked like when it was finished. It really came out cute. It's very pretty. It measured 36 inches long, the front and the back, and there is the hole to slide the end of the fur into, and I really think it's so cute. It's very, very nice. And again, like I said, this was a wonderful fur to work on. The skin was in immaculate condition. It was a joy to make. Come visit us at dinahsquilts.com.